the amount of AI chatbot apps a child can access on a smartphone is extremely dangerous. And now all the social media platforms, Meta has integrated AI chatbots into their platforms. And so you may not even know. You think your child's just on social media. You have no idea they are engaging with incredibly sexual or dangerous content conversations with a chatbot. It's kind of alarming the speed at which we've seen this acceleration. And so I would say this just underscores how urgent a tech exit is.
When I see wiffle ball and I hear the piano, I know we're probably doing okay as a family. And when I turn on the news and see what Meta has been programming AI to engage in sensual conversations with children, I don't feel bad at all about keeping my children away from social media. Now, I wouldn't have my job if not for social media. I've learned a lot. I've made and maintained many friends. I would miss social media if it were gone. I'm glad I had that elder or geriatric millennial childhood without it. Just a computer with internet contributed to enough problems, as well as, cable TV in my bedroom, but that's a separate conversation. If we as parents could see what our children see on social media, we would not hesitate to keep them away. And that is why Caleb Morell calls for a tech exit. No smartphones, social media, tablets, or video games during childhood. Morell is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and director of its Technology and Human Flourishing Project. You met her husband earlier this year on Gospelbound as Caleb Morell wrote about the history of Capitol Hill Baptist Church. Now, in Clare's book, The Tech Exit, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones, Clare says we've reached a tipping point in the fight against letting smartphones take over childhood. The key is preserving something better, something more valuable, the chance for our children to contribute to their family and community, to enjoy the bonds of families and the boundaries of neighborhoods. Clare writes, quote, "It turns out that screens cost children more than just their time. They also cause them to lose their appetite for things of the real world." And in this book, she lays out a 5-point plan. Number 1, find other families. Number 2, explain, educate, and exemplify. Number 3, adopt alternatives. Number 4, set up digital accountability and family screen rules. And then number 5, trade screens for real life responsibilities and pursuits. Clare joins me now on Gospelbound to discuss this plan and much more. Clare, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Let's just start simple. Why fight technology that feels inevitable?
Yeah, it's a big question. So, as I go into in my book, I think we have been sold a myth by the tech companies that these digital technologies are going to benefit our children and that we can avoid any harms by enabling screen time limits and parental controls. And what I try to unpack is that these digital technologies, particularly smartphones and social media and interactive tablets, are addictive by design. So they're not neutral, and they have a bent towards addiction. And especially to a vulnerable child's developing brain, they're extremely addictive. And so I explained, we've gotten the metaphor wrong as a culture that screens are more like sugar, something to be enjoyed in moderation. But in fact, they're much more like digital fentanyl in the way that they act on children's developing brains. And so I wrote this book to push back against this sense of inevitability. I wanted to explain for parents that it's actually possible to give your children a smartphone-free childhood. And in fact, more and more parents are doing this. And so I wanted to give parents an exit plan to say, this is actually how you can resist these technologies during childhood. They don't need to be inevitable. And in fact, they shouldn't be. If we dig into the research, the impacts on children's brains, and just the effect this can have on them spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, it really calls us to take the approach I'm arguing for of a total opt-out. And then this is how to do it.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because I think that's very counterintuitive, Clare, to the way most parents are thinking about this. They're imagining, like you said, it's sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, too much of it is bad, but you don't want to be the parent going around at the birthday party saying, well, my kid's not going to have any cake. Okay, so again, why are we talking here about, just like the book says, a tech exit, as opposed to just, tech moderation or tech limit?
Yeah, so this gets down to a little bit of brain science. As I've waded through the neuroscience research, what I found was that even a small amount of time on one of these addictive screen technologies can still be extremely compulsion inducing, can actually change a child's personality and behavior, even just a small amount of time. And it's because these devices release dopamine in the brain. This is a neurotransmitter. It gives us a burst of pleasure. But dopamine doesn't produce lasting satisfaction or fulfillment. It actually just creates craving or wanting to do that activity again. And so even if they're only on for 15 minutes, they get this spike of dopamine. And then what happens is as soon as they're off the device or the app, their brain goes into a dopamine deficit. It crashes and they have this strong craving to do it again. And so the time limit will never be enough. Even a strong amount of time or a small amount of time can create this strong craving for more. And I think that's where we've kind of gone astray is this idea of we set the time limits, they can have this daily screen time. And what the research really shows is even that small amount every day is really addictive to a child's brain and can change their personality. It's emotionally dysregulating. It helps, it impedes the development of what parents are trying to do and help their children develop self-control and emotional regulation because it overstimulates the child's limbic system of the brain, the part that's responsible for emotional processing, and this reward system where dopamine is released. And then the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for your personality development, your executive functioning, your self-control, emotional regulation, is underdeveloped and underutilized. And so that can happen over time. There's this cumulative impact on the brain from even a small amount of time each day. And so that's what I try to explain to parents is that sugar is not the right analogy here because even a short amount of time can really disrupt a child's natural brain development and really harm them in many ways, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
I don't doubt, Claire, that a lot of parents don't know the research that you're describing there. That's the whole point of your book. Do they not know what their kids are actually seeing on social media?
Yes, this is the other sad reality is that I think we also have been told by the tech companies that the parental controls, a parent can control a child's online experience so you can keep them from the truly bad content or dangerous predators that are out there. But the parental controls are also a myth because they don't give parents real control over what's happening inside the apps. Their algorithms are in control of a child's experience. And sadly, social media for kids looks very different than for adults. I had one mom say she really recommends that parents test drive social media, acting like a 13 or 14-year-old on the app, friending their friends, and then see what comes up in the child's feed because it is full of really dangerous things. And these algorithms just go to work recommending things to kids, and kids are naturally curious. And if they just linger on a video or a post for a few
Right.
seconds, and if that's sexual in nature or violent or even drug related, it quickly sends them down these dangerous rabbit holes where then the feed puts more and more of that type of content into the app, into what they're seeing. And a parent truly has no control over that. They cannot determine what is in their child's feed. And most apps actually block access to third-party parental controls. So you can't even see into what your children are seeing or doing. And so parents are really flying blind when it comes to social media.
I had a friend comment this week that his daughter watched two people killed in real time on her phone this week and just said, this is not normal.
No, children are being thrust into a very adult and very graphic world online. It is not unusual for children to come across beheading videos, like extremely graphic and violent, or sexual content. The average age of pornography exposure has steadily gone down as the age of first smartphone has gone down. And there's a correlation because it is all too easy for a child to accidentally stumble across pornography on a smartphone.
Oh man. I'm not sure how you'd even avoid it.
No, exactly.
It's impossible, essentially. And I think if nothing else, parents have got to be honest with themselves. If you're giving your child a smartphone, whatever age that's happening, whether that's 13, younger, 16, whatever it is, you need to understand that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Doesn't have, not to the same extent always, and it's not like there's nothing that anybody can do to prevent any of it, but that is simply part of the package. And again, I think your book is extremely helpful in helping people to have to dismiss a naive perspective,
That's
both
right.
scientifically and then technologically, of what's happening now. I want to look, Claire, at maybe the biggest implication for Christians.
Yeah.
The book is, I mean, it reflects your faith in a lot of different ways, but it's not explicitly argued necessarily, or from your faith, or limited to people who share our Christian convictions. But you say that phones have reoriented children away from aspiring to a higher purpose toward getting stuck in self-involvement. They're being trained in endless consumption. So how does Christian shape your diagnosis of the problem as well as your solutions?
Yeah, so my diagnosis is that, the problem is much deeper than kind of the teen mental health crisis that we're seeing, or even the stunted kind of brain development of children, that there is actually a very deep spiritual element to this. And that is because the medium is the message. Like I was saying, the tech is not neutral. You might think, oh, but we'll just only make sure our kids see good content on social media or on a smartphone. But the medium itself sends the message that the whole world revolves around you. I mean, this is a device that is just built for your entertainment, your satisfaction and pleasure. And the same with social media. The algorithms actually learn you. They learn what you like, and they want to feed more of that entertainment and amusement into your feed. And particularly with social media too, it encourages you to hold yourself out to the world for judgment. What do other people think about you, your pictures, your posts? And so it's an incredibly self-absorbing technology. The smartphone and social media are both inherently self-focused. And so they really cave a child inward on themselves. And this is feeding into that anxiety that we're seeing. I mean, if you are so consumed with what other people think about you, then it is incredibly anxiety inducing. And so I try to contrast that. And that's why I would say that the solution actually goes beyond the tech exit. I'm calling for the tech exit as a means to pursuing the true purpose of human life that we were all made for. And exiting from these digital technologies is not the end in itself. That ultimate end is finding our satisfaction in knowing and following and loving Jesus Christ. That is what we want to be pointing our children towards, is a relationship with the Lord Jesus, and then living out the two great commands, loving God and loving others. And so we actually want to take the screens away to lift our children's eyes up to behold the Lord and behold these greater things that we were actually created and made for. And so I'm actually hopeful, because I think Christians actually, we have the answer. We know what the path of true human flourishing is. We know what the purpose of human life is for, and we know how we were made as humans in God's image. And so, yes, this technology crisis is much deeper. There is this spiritual component that it is shaping and forming the affections and desires and vision of life for children in a direction that is not what Christian parents would want, that is not helping them learn to love and follow Jesus. And so part of the solution is, I'm arguing obviously for the tech exit, but that is, I view it as a means to this greater end of trying to point our children to what we know is the true purpose of life, knowing and loving God, being satisfied in Him, and then having that love emanate outwards in loving others in our communities, our churches, in our families.
That's so good. You're helping us to have the freedom from, so
That's
that
right.
we can have the freedom for.
Yes.
You do a great job of laying out that you need that expulsive power of a new affection ultimately, as well as Chalmers would describe. When I'm often teaching the development of Western notions of the self and identity and things like that over the course of the last 500 years, I progressed from Luther and the thunderstorm through the revolutions, and then I end with the posture of holding a smartphone and the curvature of your body, the curving inward on yourself to be able to look down at this device. And I just don't think that's accidental at all. It's very much the case that, unlike other technologies, this is not something that draws you into an experience with others so much, but one that caters to your custom
That's right.
experience. And it reshapes, and I think especially those, as I mentioned in the introduction, who did not grow up with anything else, it shapes their expectations about the world. All the more necessary to help them to understand the world does not revolve around them, that their desires need to be sanctified for their own good before they even know what sort of, they need to taste the good things so that they can then discern later on, oh, actually that doesn't taste very good at all.
That's right.
Compared to what I've been feasting on. Now, Claire, a couple of skeptical questions here, which I know are the kind of pushback that you'll get and have gotten and that I get fairly often as well. What good is exiting tech if none of the other families are following suit? And in fact, could actually be worse and even hurt our children if they're left out of everything.
Yes, no, I get this question a lot, which is why, as you know, said in the introduction, one of my main principles is finding other families. And that doesn't mean that you convince everyone in your community to do this, but if you can just find a few other families who agree to keep their kids off smartphones, I mean, that's a huge difference. If your child has one or two other friends who are also not on that, on the devices, then that is huge. But that may not be the case. And what I would say is that it's still your responsibility and your obligation to your child to do what you know is best for them as a parent. We don't, especially as Christian parents, I think we're used to being countercultural in a lot of parenting decisions. And that is our job as a parent is to protect our children and so we can't be pressured into just giving something to our child that we know is bad for them. And I do think friendship is a real concern. And so what I would encourage parents is, as you're saying no to tech, if your child truly is the only other friend in their circles that doesn't have a smartphone, like you need to really work to help build your child's social life in the real world. Like maybe that means actually driving, 20 minutes to bring your child to a friend's house that also agrees with your tech decisions if they're not in your immediate school or neighborhood, finding other families through your church. And I'm so convinced now that most parents know the phones are bad and everyone feels pressured into them. And so being the parent to open the conversation and inviting other parents to consider this, I actually think a lot of parents would be receptive to doing it if they felt like they had an ally. And so I encourage parents in my book, be the one to take the first step and open this conversation with other parents in your class, your child's class or your church or your neighborhood. The last thing I will say is one dad told me that they actually found that their decisions around technology were extremely friend filtering. And by that, he meant his kids found their real friends faster. And he said it's because if a child wouldn't talk to his kid because they weren't on the Snapchat app or they weren't in the group iMessage text because they didn't have a smartphone, he was like, well, that's not a real friend. And he explained like his kids had friends who had smartphones and they had some friends who didn't. But they were those kids that were friends with them who had the smartphones. They were actually genuine friends. They would include his children if they weren't on the apps. They'd say, hey, we're all getting together at, Johnny's house to play basketball. And so they went out of their way to accommodate their difference. And what he said to me is that's the sign of real friendship, is that we accommodate each other's differences. And so he found that their tech decisions actually even trained their kids of what to look for in a real friend. And so I guess my short answer is like, it's a real concern. Parents, we should do everything we can to help our children build real friendships in the real world, and recognize even our tech restrictions can help them discern what good friendship is. And then just not be afraid to do the right thing, even if that does carry some costs to our kids. That it's not worth the harms of handing them a smartphone. That's not the answer. We have to do what we know is best for our kids.
Another thing, Claire, that I teach in my classes is a long-term, thousands-year perspective on introducing technology, new technologies, and the way they change cultures. They don't always change cultures in expected ways. They don't always, usually they don't. They don't always change them in purely bad ways. There's usually there's usually some trade-off. The true discernment is figuring out what trade-offs are worth the introduction of the technology. No skeptical question then. If thanks to smartphones, we have fewer drunk drivers and fewer babies born out of wedlock, is that such a bad trade-off?
Oh, yes. I do hear this pushback a lot because I think, as you're alluding to, studies now show that the rates of teen sex or drunk driving have really plummeted because kids are not going out and doing things with their friends. They're not being the risky teenagers they used to be because they're just on the smartphone. Right. I think it's hard to say. Obviously, drunk driving and teen pregnancy out of wedlock are not good things. And I think that there can be this illusion like, oh, well, we've traded this for this. I would say I think that it's just not a fair, it's not a good comparison to make. I think we need to think seriously and question, is it really safe to just leave a kid at home with a smartphone, and not encouraging them to make friends? And so, of course, I think as Christian parents, we want to incentivize them to be going out into the real world. And that actually has less risks than the online world. Because here's the thing, the online world, it is incredibly easy for predators and dangerous things to gain access to our kids. Far more bad influences our kids are able to come across in the online world than in the real world. And so it's really important to not think, oh, just if I leave my kid at home with the smartphone, I know they'll be safer. I think that's a complete myth. In fact, I would say they're more safe just going out with their friends, maybe doing some stupid teenage things than they are at home, because I could even just recount the explosion in rates of sextortion cases,
Oh boy.
where a predator poses as a person in their local community as a friend. These have just exploded. They've increased by over 300% the last several years, where teen boys are falling prey to these sextortion schemes
And committing suicide.
and committing suicide. And the parents all say, I had no idea. He was just in his room. I thought he was completely safe. And so I would say there's been, in my opinion, looking at the metrics, way more harms to kids from the smartphones. Just even looking at the rates of teen suicide or depression, anxiety, eating disorders, self-harm. These have all greatly increased because of kids turning to the virtual world instead of the real world. And so, unfortunately, they are not safer sitting in their bedroom on a smartphone. I would say they are actually far more at risk of coming across dangerous content or being preyed upon by predators who now have 24/7 easy access to children, that they just have never had before in human history.
It's like Jonathan Haidt famously says, we protect our children in the real world way too much now, and we protect them way too little in the online world. I think a lot of that just has to do with the relative generational ignorance, which is odd to me for parents, because I don't know. I guess, Claire, some of the problem is we don't know whether our experience is indicative of other people's, or we're just not curious about whether our experience is part of a broader trend, because we mentioned the drunk driving, we mentioned the teen pregnancy. Of course, related to that, surveys just showing recently Americans just have way less sex, period.
Yes.
Now, and usually it's married couples have the most by far. It's very different from all the sitcoms that you've seen in the 1990s and things like that. But clearly the driving factor behind that is also smartphones.
Yes.
As well. So I wonder if people just don't even understand what change they're a part of, let alone understand what's going on with their children. Now, also, Claire, your work, Ethics and Public Policy Center, Technology and Human Flourishing Project, you're engaging in public policy. You see public policy moving toward or away from your recommendations?
I see it largely moving toward. I would say just in the last several years, I've been very encouraged by lots of policy changes at the state level in particular. So just a couple to highlight would be age verification for pornography websites laws. 24 states, that's nearly half the country, have passed these laws in just the last 3 years. And the Supreme Court in June of this past year just recently upheld Texas's law as constitutional, which was just a huge landmark case and victory. And not just for age verification for porn sites laws, but I think it has ramifications beyond that, because the court decision said, adults have no First Amendment right to avoid age verification. Yes, they may have rights to access certain speech that we don't want kids accessing, but they don't have a right to avoid age verification. We have to have a way to be able to age gate certain things on the internet from kids. And so I'm hopeful this will pave the path forward as well for other maybe age-related restrictions for social media, which is another solution I've pushed for. The other winning policy solution has been school phone bans. So 18 states plus the District of Columbia now have bell-to-bell phone bans. That means out of the entire school day, not just the classroom time, but also the social environment. Now kids are free of phones and social media during lunch, passing periods, recess. And this has just been incredibly effective in terms of just seeing student conversation, camaraderie, relationships really flourish in the absence of the phone, student discipline issues decrease, and then, of course, academic outcomes have seen a great boost from the phone bans. And so those are just two examples of solutions that have taken off really in just the last 2 to 3 years. Like a couple states were the leaders and they saw such success from these policies that then other states have adopted them. And I'm hopeful that particularly at the federal level, we'll see an age verification for porn sites bill pass nationally. And then I would love, ideally, to see Congress move towards age restricting social media out of childhood. I think we were talking about the difficulty individual parents feel
Right.
in those decisions to opt out. And so, like this, the country
Yeah.
of Australia has recently raised the age of social media to 16 because it provides that collective solution that helps everyone. Where okay, this is no longer a part of childhood, and I've made the analogy that this is very similar to alcohol or tobacco, a highly addictive substance to a child's brain. We've age restricted those, and likewise, technologies that are too powerful for children to operate, like motor vehicles or firearms, have also been age restricted. So I think there are helpful precedents in our laws to look to in the real world to think about some of these policy solutions to say, should we just age restrict social media out of childhood? And I'm hopeful we're moving in that direction.
Well, that's very, very well said. Alabama passed both of those in the
Yeah.
last year, the age verification on porn as well as the smartphone bans. So very grateful for those. Let's continue on this theme here and just do kind of rapid response here. Most important tech decision that could be made right now by, it might just be what you said right there, Congress. Number one, what's the most important decision they could make right now?
Age restrict social media, but I'd also add to that now to age restrict AI chatbots. I don't
Okay.
think minors should have access to AI chatbots at all.
Okay. So let's go into that because I was going to say, how would you write this book now, given what we've seen on AI? These books are written over the course of months and years. And I will say, I'm well aware of it now. I don't know how many parents are aware of it, but you and I both know that when surveys have come back on what is the number one use of AI from teenagers, it's chat. I mean, it's chatbots, therapy.
Yes. Companions.
Essentially.
Yeah,
Companions.
nearly 3/4 of teens have used an AI chatbot at some point, and over half say they do so on more than a weekly basis. I mean, that's just one survey of teens. And I think so. I would just say my book, while it doesn't touch on AI, it addresses this in the sense that smartphones and social media were already addictive. Adding AI to them is only going to make this problem, I mean, exponentially worse.
Oh,
And
way
so
worse. Way
I would
worse.
just say I'm hopeful that this book being out will actually help parents realize that the tech exit is more urgent than ever, because the amount of AI chatbot apps a child can access on a smartphone without a parent necessarily knowing what they're doing is extremely dangerous. And now all the social media platforms, Meta has integrated AI chatbots into their platforms. And so you may not even know. You think your child's just on social media. You have no idea they are engaging with incredibly sexual or dangerous content conversations with a chatbot, who's obviously not a real person. And so it's just, I think it's kind of alarming the speed at which we've seen this acceleration. And so I would say this just underscores how urgent a tech exit is, particularly the smartphone. It is just a portal to hundreds and thousands of portals to the internet, which now include dangerous AI chatbots. And so we should just really seriously think about that as parents, that the most important thing we can do is really just to not give a child a smartphone. And if they have one, it's never too late to reverse course. And I walk through in my book. It's never too late to take the smartphone away and to say,
Yeah.
Listen, we didn't know all this. We made a mistake and we want to do differently now.
It's a major focus for us at the Gospel Coalition on AI, and in terms of helping families, helping churches, helping individuals discern better and worse uses of them. What you described right there is definitely at the top of the list of the worst of the uses of it. We mentioned earlier the suicides that had followed predation, especially sexploitation of young men. But we also have examples of how the quote unquote alignment systems of AI. So for people who don't know, alignment is you still have to program AI. You have to tell AI what it can say and what it can't say. And so we have some basic ideas of, as a society, we've concluded, not formally, but informally, that you shouldn't be able to ask AI how to pull off a terrorist attack. And you shouldn't be able to ask AI how you should commit suicide. However, the way around this is that the chatbots are narcissistic.
Yes.
They are merely reflective and they're affirming.
Mm-hmm.
So if a child, and unfortunately we've seen tragic cases like this, if your child is willing and interested in committing suicide, we have examples of AI affirming, yes, that looks like a good method to do it, and empathizing, as a computer with actually no empathetic ability does, empathizing, saying, and I affirm your decision in doing this as well. With parents, once again, not having any idea. So I think, Claire, that the underlying principles are the same.
That's right.
But extending even more so. I think a lot of people don't understand the analogy here is that everything that happened with social media will happen on AI at a more accelerated rate.
This is exactly right. Yep.
And I don't understand why people, talk about a little bit more of how that is, because I don't think people understand what that means.
Yeah. What it means is, so I think the danger is that it is, because it is mimicking a real life person. So the chatbots, it is just computer code, but to a child, it's a character. It has a name. It has a personality. And children have a much harder time discerning between reality and fantasy. And this is, again, preying on children's brain vulnerabilities and creating this friendship. And then the child starts to actually form a bond of trust with the chatbot. That's far more dangerous than just scrolling a social media feed.
Right.
It is creating this ongoing relationship. And as you mentioned, the chatbots are narcissistic. They're very affirming. They're never going to tell the child they're wrong. And so in some ways, they're like the perfect friend, or the perfect boyfriend or girlfriend for teenagers who are engaging in these kind of romantic relationships, because they tell you everything that you want to hear. And they really are, and so much of technology does this, it is frictionless. It removes the barriers that we would experience in real life of having to navigate a real person's flaws or shortcomings or challenges, work through conflict in friendship. And so it's an incredibly just kind of scary technology in the sense that it mimics a person, but it is not like a human relationship, and it can really quickly lead children into doing extremely dangerous things. The horror stories that have come out about the kids committing suicide or just falling in love with a chatbot. They feel more bonded to the chatbot than to people in the real world. And so it's incredibly disembodying and just really just morphing a child's worldview in a very dangerous, inhumane way.
And very similar to what we saw in pornography, removes the frictions of relationship when it comes to sex. So we covered Congress. We just kind of recap here. What number one most important decision could be made right now by your family?
Okay, I think I kind of just said it. I would just say get rid of the smartphones. If I had to pick one thing, it's the smartphone, because that's the portal to everything. It's the portal to social media. Now it's the portal to chatbots, the portal to the internet. That is just too difficult for a parent to effectively oversee. So if you can do one thing, no smartphones.
Are you in all the way through 18 or 16? Where do you fall on that?
I think it's really important to hold out the ideal of 18. That's just like a marker for adulthood. We also know the human brain isn't fully developed until 25. And so, you could even encourage your children to keep going through college without smartphones, as some of the families I interviewed in my book do. I think the longer we can delay, the better, because you're laying the foundation of their habits, their life habits. And you want that to be these habits formed without dependence on a smartphone. And that means then when they do use a smartphone as an adult, they're not going to have the same dependence or pull or addiction towards it as they would if they'd grown up on it. And so I would say 16 is okay. I would really say, 18 is even more ideal. And I also think we just have to kind of lose this mile marker of the smartphone now becoming this kind of sign of adulthood. It really used to be the driver's license. I think we really need to just step back as society and kind of reject this premise of inevitability of the smartphone. I'm an adult. I don't have a smartphone. And it's because there are better alternative options available now than there were even 3 years ago, that allow me to have tools to navigate the world like GPS and a camera and Uber and Venmo, but without the internet, social media apps, or other
Oh,
addictive apps on the phone. So I want to
yeah.
kind of encourage parents to not accept that this is at some point my child will get one, because I think then that just so easily creeps back into childhood, but actually to just question the premise. Do they actually need one? And and then just to just try to think about extending that as far back as possible so that they're able to form as many habits without it.
That's helpful. I mean, in my mind, I had just associated driving essentially with smartphones, but I didn't realize how many things you could do now without that. So I
Yeah.
think it's another thing for families to know.
I think it's actually important, and this is maybe one of the biggest gaps for parents of information, is that now there are phones like the Bark phone, the Gab phone, the Pinwheel phone. I have personally the Wise phone, that allow you to use GPS for driving. I understand that's important for a lot of parents and to have a tool for communication with their child when they're driving, but it doesn't have social media apps or an internet browser, or access to any kind of addictive app. So, no chatbots, no games, nothing that would be dangerous, truly just tools. And so, I really encourage parents to explore those alternatives. Don't opt for a smartphone. I mean, delay the first cell phone as long as possible. I think delaying a cell phone till driving makes a lot of sense. And then again,
Yeah,
opting for an alternative to the smartphone when you do get a first phone for your child.
that's very helpful. And the more people who make these decisions, the better the technology will be because the market will shift
Exactly.
to be able to provide it.
Yep.
So that collective action principle as well. Okay, finally, let's come back. A lot of people don't think about this category. It's not the focus of your book, but I know you've thought about it, I'm sure. What about your church?
Yes. I would say, I mean, since my book is focused on kids, the most important thing you can do is create a youth group culture at your church that is smartphone, social media free, kind of like the school cell phone bans. I would encourage youth groups to say, hey, we don't do smartphones at youth group. You might as well leave it at home. Otherwise, when you come, you can hand in your phones here and you'll get them after youth group, because that would actually protect a space for those teens to, I mean, first of all, listen to the teaching while they're at youth group, but then also to have that true fellowship and real life relationship where they're not being distracted away on their phones. And then also so that Christian parents know when they send their kid to youth group that at youth group, they're not going to be accidentally exposed to something on someone else's smartphone. And so I think it's
Yeah.
important that Christian parents feel like youth group in their church is a safe place to send their kids where they're not going to be potentially exposed to dangers through smartphones or social media. So I would really encourage youth groups to create a culture that normalizes like no phones, and we're actually going to focus on real life relationships while we're here.
Yeah, I love that. And especially, I think that should go without saying. A lot of youth groups involve camps, a lot of youth groups involve overnights, lock ins, things
Yeah.
like that. Smartphones in those events are total disasters. That
Yeah.
is a
You
no
only
go.
hear bad stories
Only,
when there's access to phones.
only bad stories there. Absolutely. Um, okay, a few more quick questions here. We're talking with Caleb Morell again about the Tech Exit, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. We may have covered this already, so that's why I'm thinking maybe this will be quick. Most common pushback you get in your personal life, as well as in response to the book and some of the interviews and conversations you've had.
Yeah, I think the concern about friends. I think also the pushback I get is, well, then how will my child be able to function in this digital age if they don't know the technology, or how will they, be able to actually use technology wisely as an adult if they're not able to have me train them on it? And I would just say both of those really turn out to be myths. It's not about knowing how to operate a smartphone or social media to be successful in this digital age. A lot of the families I interviewed allowed their children to learn how to use a computer in a public place with purpose, learning how to code or use Microsoft Excel, like actually developing hardcore tech skills that will prepare them for the
Yeah.
workplace. But learning how to scroll on a smartphone is just teaching you how to be constantly entertained and amused. It's not actually giving you real tech skills.
Yeah.
And then on the principle, oh, I need to train them on it now so that they use it maturely as an adult. As I was alluding to earlier, these kids who grew up without them don't have habits of dependence on the smartphone. And so even when they got a smartphone in college, they didn't have the same draw or pull to it, that they were actually able to use it more wisely and maturely because they hadn't developed the being used to checking it all the time. And so I think what's more important is forming kids' core habits, helping them develop self-control, which is stunted by handing them screens constantly. And that will prepare them to operate it maturely as adults, as well as parents modeling for them how we'd want them to use that. And that's how we approach any other powerful technology or substance is we don't say, "Oh, we want to train you on a healthy use, so we'll just give it to you young," like driving a car or allowing a child to drink alcohol. Instead, we try to model healthy uses of those things, have conversations around it to train them for it. But there's an age of maturity we recognize for them actually being able to use it for themselves.
Another quick question here, Claire. I know it's a real concern. It's a scary concern, and it's one that is often deployed as a defeater to the school bans. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this.
Yep.
Parents need nonstop access to their children due to the possibility of a school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond?
Yeah, so I explain in the book that school safety experts actually say kids are more safe not having access to smartphones in that, absolute worst case scenario, horrific event that no parent. I mean, it's sad that we actually have to think about that. And I would just say that their advice is that kids having access to phones can actually be more dangerous in an active shooter situation or other just emergency situation in the school because kids are distracted, then they're not listening to first responders' instructions. Phones that can be set off or ping can actually make it easier for a shooter to identify where people are, or if
They
a
draw
child,
attention.
or if
Draw
a
attention
child,
to you if
I
you're
mean,
hiding.
kids, I mean, I just want to say they don't always understand these things. They might access social media and go on social media, and they're on social media on their phone during this event, and that makes it easier for a shooter to identify where students are. And so there's so many ways that the phones actually make that situation more dangerous than if a child doesn't have a phone. They listen to the instructions of their teacher, to the emergency personnel involved. And we should just remember, like, teachers have cell phones on them. There are people in the building that have phones. If it's a true emergency, every child having a phone actually makes that type of situation much more dangerous. And of course, what we all want is to keep our children safe, but the smartphone bans actually help keep children safer. And it's important for parents to understand that message.
Yeah. That was something that really stood out. I hadn't really thought that through. My kids aren't old enough yet to be going through that, but it felt like a really important topic. I wanted to make sure we covered it here as well.
Sure.
You mentioned Australia earlier.
Yeah.
Other countries that follow your recommendations better than at least the United States does so far, you think?
I think that the UK and some countries in Europe, like Sweden, are a little bit ahead of the curve on some of these things. They've recognized the data because obviously the smartphone and social media is not a unique US problem. This has been a global issue, particularly in the developed world of these kids having access to technology and seeing bad results from it. So, the UK has enacted age verification for pornography websites. They were even ahead of us in terms of banning phones from schools. They have a lot of communities now that have completely banned phones from schools and even kind of created a cultural movement of parents saying we want to be like a community-wide, town-wide, free of smartphones. So the smartphone-free childhood movement was born in the UK and has really taken off there. Sweden is interesting too. They have, banned phones from the school day, as well as some of the other Scandinavian countries like Norway and Finland. And so some of the earliest studies to come out on the effectiveness of school phone bans came from the UK and came from Norway and other countries. So I think it should just encourage the US that other countries have done this, and it actually helps to look at their examples, and we can learn from how their experience has been implementing some of these policies.
And nobody's saying, boy, that was a huge mistake. We should go back.
No.
And in fact, let me ask you about schools. Have you ever heard of that in a school?
going back to the
Yeah,
phones?
saying we banned phones, but like, no, that was terrible. We're going to bring the phones back.
No. It's only gone one direction, and I'm encouraged because I think even just
Yeah.
seeing the effectiveness, more and more schools kinda tend to follow suit just based on the results that we're seeing so positively.
Yeah. And a quick question on that one as well. Who is the constituency opposed to the bans?
Okay, this
Parents,
is kinda
administrators,
sad.
teachers,
It's mainly parents.
and students, by the way.
Oh,
Students,
I mean,
that's,
students, of course. I
yeah,
mean, a lot of
yeah,
students don't like it. But, I will say what's encouraging is some students initially oppose it and then they come to really appreciate the benefits of the ban because they
yeah.
realize just how distracted and stressed they were by the different drama happening on the phones during the school day. And they say, now I actually feel free to be myself. I enjoy actually talking to my friends in person. So, the main constituency that has kept some schools from being able to enact these, it's not the teachers or the administration. They are obviously seeing these effects firsthand and are very eager to get rid of the phones, but they get a lot of pushback from parents. And
From the
again, I would
parents.
say,
Hmm.
um, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I would just say, kind of uninformed parents who, again, they want that constant access to their child. They think that they need it, and they haven't maybe considered how that constant access could actually be harming their child and even be distracting to them. So I've heard from several teachers the biggest challenge about the cell phones is actually a parent is calling the student in the middle of class or texting them about something we've gotten so used to this convenience of kind of instant communication that parents are the ones who are most kind of resistant to a phone ban. And so that's why I wrote in the book, I wanted to explain all the reasons because I'm trying to help bring parents on board because in communities where the parents are supportive, then the school is like so eager to do this. And so I want more parents to actually say, like, we want to see this in our schools.
Last question, Claire, and this probably is the one that's going to be hardest for a lot of us here watching and listening. How are parents supposed to do this if we're on our own phones all the time?
It is definitely the most convicting question. So I do touch on this in the book, in that chapter on explaining, educating, and exemplifying. And I was just alluding to this in my other answer that a big part of how we train kids how to use this well is we have to model it for them as parents. And if we are communicating to our children that the most valuable thing that we give our time to and attention to is our phones, then kids will think that these are extremely valuable. They will be so
Right.
intrigued that they want to have one and it will become this appealing part of being an adult is having one of these phones. And so I really encourage parents, you do not have to get rid of your smartphone, though I don't think it's a bad thing if you do. But we really should think very carefully about distancing ourselves physically from our devices, especially when we're home and we're with our kids, just because the mere presence of a smartphone, they've done studies on this, is distracting to our brain. It's actually draining us of mental emotional energy, resisting checking our phone if it's on us and we're trying to be present with our kids. And so I recommend families get a phone box where you just try to leave your phones when you come home from work. At least protect dinner time, bedtime, and don't go check your phone again until your kids are asleep. So just having daily rhythms and practices of separating ourselves from our devices allows us to be present with our kids, and it breaks that total addiction. It's very mentally freeing to actually practice being physically separated from your phone. I know other families do like a phone-free Saturday where they really just the parents try to completely put the phone away for the day. A lot of parents have now opted to have a landline in case of emergency, so they're not constantly tied to their smartphones. And so I would think through ways that you yourself can distance yourself from your phone and how to make your phone less addicting to you by ruthlessly eliminating apps that you don't actually need to do on your phone that could
Yeah.
wait till you're at a computer, turn off notifications, just make it as unappealing as possible to you so you're truly using it as a tool and it's not sucking you into distraction.
Well, it's pretty obvious, Claire. You thought this through pretty well. It's obvious in this interview. It's obvious in the book. It's obvious in the advocacy work that you do. And I just want to say thank you for all of the above, for how you've helped guide people here, how the book goes into even greater detail on a lot of this stuff and far more, and the continued political advocacy work you do there in Washington, D.C. Again, the book, Tech Exit, Practical Guide to Freeing Kids and Teens from Their Smartphones. Clare Morell is my guest. Claire, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Gospelbound. For more interviews and to sign up for my newsletter, head over to tgc.org/gospelbound. Rate and review Gospelbound on your favorite podcast platform so others can join the conversation. Until next time, remember, when we're bound to the gospel, we abound in hope.